breaking the silence, restoring the memory of nuclear testing, and amplifying the voices of its victims in Algeria. My name is Amel, and I am the program manager for SHOAA for Human Rights. On behalf of SHOAA and our partner, the International Peace Bureau, I would like to warmly thank all participants and speakers for joining us today and extend our sincere appreciation to our speakers and moderator for joining us also today. I'm going to start with a brief historical overview. So between 1960 and 1966, France conducted 17 nuclear tests in the Algerian Sahara, including 4 atmospheric tests in Regan region and 13 underground tests in Acre. These tests were carried out during the final years of French colonial rule and continued even after Algeria's independence, under agreements that left Algerian authorities and population with little control and information. So large areas of land were contaminated, safety protocols were insufficient, and local population, including Tuareg and other communities and workers at these test sites, were exposed to radioactive fallout without adequate protection or warning, and no enough or sufficient information were provided. So now, more than 60 years later, the consequences of these tests remain deeply visible. Communities in southern Algeria continue to report high rates of diseases such as cancer, other chronic illnesses, environmental degradation, and restricted access to land that remains unsafe. Yet, the full extent of this contamination is still unknown due to limited access to archives, incomplete data, and the absence of a comprehensive environmental and health studies, which remains very problematic in Algeria. So, despite these long-term harms, victims of these French nuclear tests in Algeria to this day continue to face systematic obstacles, especially when it comes to recognition and reparation. Compensation mechanisms established by France still remain largely exclude Algerian victims, and they do apply restrictive criteria and place the burden of proof on individuals who often lack documentation. At the same time, demands for accountability, environmental remediation, and transparency have remained largely unmet. So the silence we're speaking about today is not just historical, but it is still ongoing. The Algerian nuclear legacy remains marginal in global discussions on nuclear harm, even in frameworks such as the IPPNW clearly affirm the rights of victims and the obligations of state regarding victims assistance and environmental remediation, but they stay problematic to this day. So this is why the webinar this time, intentionally centers the victim's perspective, different from other events that we usually do that talk about the historical fallouts. So the objective today is to shift the focus from abstract nuclear history to lived realities, and to examine how victims today are identified and why recognition remains elusive, and what justice, reparation, and environmental repair should mean in the Algerian context specifically. We are honored to be joined today by distinguished panels of speakers who bring legal, historical, and medical and advocacy perspectives. And they will help us today to better understand the political, legal, and humanitarian dimensions of this unresolved legacy. I would also like to thank Aigerim Seitenova, founder of Qazaq Nuclear Frontline Coalition, for moderating today's discussion. So thank you once again for being today with us, and we hope this conversation will contribute to breaking the case of silence around this issue, and to advance into a more just, transparent, victim-centered approach. And I now give the floor to our moderator, Aigerim. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Iman, for introducing the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today on the webinar on the nuclear legacy of Algeria and the ongoing struggle for justice, recognition, and accountability. My name is Aigerim Seitenova. I'm a human rights professional and a nuclear justice advocate from Kazakhstan, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I'm also a third-generation survivor of Soviet nuclear testing, and much of my work focuses on nuclear colonialism, justice for affected communities, and the role of civil society in addressing long-term harm. I would like to thank SHOAA for Human Rights and IPB for organizing this webinar, and I sincerely thank our speakers for contributing their expertise and commitment to this important conversation. So today, and I wanted to give a little bit of a background as well, but very shortly before I go into the panel itself. In recent years, international discussions, particularly under the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, have increasingly emphasized the importance of victim assistance, environmental remediation, and historical injustice. However, in Algeria's case, remains underrepresented in the global discussions, and survivors continue to lack clear pathways toward compensation and acknowledgement. So I hope that today's webinar will give some answers and pathways to guide the conversation further. The structure of today's webinar, it's structured around three interconnected perspectives based on the background of three brilliant speakers we have today: Dr. Patrice Richard, Dr. Amel Mejri, and Jean-Marie Collin. And they will give the historical and political context. Then we will go to the topic of survivor recognition and legal struggles. And then the last topic will be political and administrative responses. So what has been done and what remains to be unresolved. And this structure particularly allows us to move from history to lived experiences and to responsibility and action. Our first speaker is Dr. Patrice Richard, and it's my pleasure to introduce you. He's a co-president of AMFPGN IPPNW France. Dr. Richard is a medical doctor and long-standing advocate for nuclear disarmament and preventive medicine. Through his work with IPPNW France, he has been deeply involved in raising awareness of the humanitarian and public health consequences of nuclear weapons. So yeah, Dr. Patrice, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us. You have around 15 minutes. Thank you.
It's a question of, it's really for me to talk, eh? Okay, you're right, okay. Well, the problem of the reparation of the damage made in Algeria is starting in 1960. Because when the first bomb exploded, which was called Gerboise Blue, Gerboise, little animals running in the desert. And it was already going to the independence of Algeria. And the agreement of Evian in 1962 finished definitively to give to Algeria the independence. But the problem was the site of test in Polynesia was not ready. And it was an agreement between the French government and Algeria, independent Algeria, to use a site for a few times more until the time was ready in Polynesia. And suddenly the government of Algeria said, no, it's finished, go away, go away, go away. So we left and let the thing like that. So we had a mission of some expert going to the place. And we could see that the situation was absolutely dramatic and catastrophic locally. We could see that some sand, which have been vitrified, by the explosion, was used by the Tuareg to make some jewel hanging around their neck, so radioactive. And everything was open, no fence, no panel, nothing, no trespassing, nothing. So the situation was very bad. And understand that it was urgent to do everything. And when the discussion started, it was not a problem to discuss. The problem is to get an agreement. And actually, it is still the same. The situation is blocked, First, we have to admit that the relations between France and Algeria are not good at all, actually. So it's not a good moment. we could maybe around this make progress, but it is evident that when there is a contentious about all these questions, we can go ahead. But still, few things could have been done. For instance, put fence, protection, give indication for the Tuareg which are working there, and stop people. Okay. Also, when the government of Algeria asked for money through the Siven and the Aven, that was when the Minister of Defense, Morin, make a good step forward. It's recent, you know, because the French was absolutely straight against effort to do anything in Sahara. You have a very powerful right wing in France, which is considering that the loss of Algeria is like a loss of a leg. And these people are still very active and they block a lot of things, and sometimes they put oil on the fire, like did the former Minister of Interior, Mr. Reteillo, recently, about the writer, Sensal. So when the situation was not evolving at all, in the years, I remember, because I was not member of the commission at that time, but we have a commission of French experts, doctors and radiobiologists, going to talk to the GP of Algeria and speak with them in a kind of tutorial what to do in front of a patient which had been irradiated, or claimed to have been irradiated. That was a very good tutorial. The Algerian doctors were very happy with that. And there are a lot of these seance. And the government of Algeria looks neutral, if not maybe a little bit happy, that we could take in charge tutorial for the local doctor. After that, nothing, absolutely nothing. Alors, the government of Algeria asked for money, but what money? How much money? When you have kilometers square of sound radioactive, and not only the sound on your face, but the sound underneath, because when the wind is pushing the sound, it will make accumulation of a dune in the corner, so the top sound is going to be deeper. So if you go to work there, you can detect it, or you have to make a little digging to find where is the radioactivity. It's very complex, and the radiation map of the contamination is extremely difficult. We have to remake it completely. It's a new job to do. It's a huge work. So the French government don't want to spend money on this. I'm not saying that I agree, understand. Of course, I disagree. As a doctor, IPPNW, I can accept that. But I try to understand what things are going in my government. Also, when they don't give money, the demand, they don't give an amount of money, I don't ask. It is maybe because they have no idea how to do it. And if I was in charge of cleaning up the site, even with some specialist of atomic energy department, cleaning up a site like that, what do you do? Do you carry all the sand which is contaminated? Do you bury it deep, or what do you do? It's kilometer square. So nobody has an idea of what's that cost. Nobody has an idea what to do. And it is evident if someone which is not experimented in radioactivity will get irradiated immediately. He will make mistake. He will confuse. He will, you know. So giving the money to Algeria and said, hey, do the job, and okay, for us, we wash our hand, is not a very, very good solution. It's a bit selfish, I would say. So still we have to do something, but I can't do anything at the moment. I am always, every time we have the opportunity to say that, we talk with our government about that as experts, because there are not so many experts in radioactivity, on the effect of biological effect of radioactivity. I was myself working in a bone marrow transplant unit which cure leukemia, and leukemia are the first disease after contamination by radioactivity. So I am very sensitive to this radioactivity. But what to do now, I have no idea. I have really no idea. And except through money, tons of money, and like you know, nobody will do that. If you have more questions, I can give you more detail.
Thank you so much for also, I think that you highlighted the needs and significance of why there is a need for international support as well, but also needs assessment in cleaning up the sites. And I think that we'll go to the questions later after all the speakers present their inputs. And I do have already some questions to you, Dr. Richard, but thank you so much for giving the background and highlighting that there is a lot of issues that are unresolved, but maybe a political will from France and some clear guidance towards remediation will support the communities in Algeria and Algerian Sahara. Thank you so much. We'll go now to our second speaker, Dr. Amel El-Mejri. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. El-Mejri has a PhD in international law and has worked with institutions such as the African Court on Human Rights and People's Rights, the Arab Atomic Energy Agency, and the UNDP. And your work focuses on civil society engagement, participatory governance, and rights-based approaches. It will be great also if you could speak about the legal and administrative challenges faced by the survivors of the French nuclear testing, including the challenges to recognition and difficulties in proving harm and the lack of clear legal pathways for remediation reparations. Amel, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aigerim, and thanks very much for the invitation and for organizing this important webinar today. I'll be presenting. Today I will speak about victims of nuclear testing in Algeria, focusing on challenges of recognition and why recognition is not symbolic, why it is foundational for justice, reparation, and for healing. As already mentioned, between 1960 and 1966, nuclear tests were conducted in the Algerian Sahara. They caused profound harm to people, to the land, and to the ecosystems. But yet, for decades, those affected have faced not only illness and environmental degradation, but also they faced silence, invisibility, and denial. Breaking this silence is not about reopening the past. It is about acknowledging ongoing harm and restoring dignity to victims who have waited far too long to be recognized. Why recognition is important? From victims' perspective, recognition is the gateway to all other rights. Without recognition, victims cannot access healthcare or compensation. Environmental contamination remains unaddressed, and harm is excluded from collective memory. Recognition is about naming harm, acknowledging responsibility, and affirming victims as rights holders. This is especially important in the context of nuclear harm, where health effects may appear decades later and future generations and affect future generations. Recognition must therefore be long-term and intergenerational, not limited to a single moment in time. I will do a little link to the IPPNW Article 6 about humanitarian and legal framework. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, particularly Article 6, provides a powerful framework to understand the issue. It requires victim assistance, including medical and psychological support. It also requires, in its paragraph 2, environmental remediation of contaminated areas and international cooperation to fulfill these obligations. I just want to highlight that Algeria has signed the TPNW in 20 September 2017. And
I think that we lost Amel, right?
Yes.
I think she might have some technical issues with the internet. Yeah, she's back.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it seems that I have an unstable internet connection, but where did I stop?
Yeah, so you stopped that Algeria has signed the treaty in 2017, but probably continued with non-ratification.
So I was saying that all these duties, the victim assistance, the environmental remediation, and the international cooperation, they depend on a single condition, which is the identification and the recognition of victims and affected communities. So under TPNW, recognition is not optional. It is a continuing legal obligation grounded in human dignity, in non-discrimination and prevention of future harm. Let me now turn to the French legal framework, which remains central to the victims' claims. In 2010, as Dr. Richard mentioned, France adopted La Loi Morin, creating a compensation mechanism for victims of nuclear tests in both Algeria and French Polynesia. While this law represents an important and symbolic step, its implementation actually has revealed serious structural limitations. Victims must navigate restrictive eligibility criteria, narrow lists of recognized illnesses, and very, very complex evidentiary requirements. Although later reforms introduced a presumption of causality, this presumption actually remains rebuttable, and decisions are taken through administrative procedures that are difficult to access, particularly to Algerian victims. The impact of these barriers is visible actually in the data. Since 2010, approximately 2,200 compensation claims have been submitted under the Loi Morin. The vast majority came from French Polynesia. By contrast, around 50 to 60 claims only have been filed by Algerian victims. And only one Algerian victim has received compensation. This actually stark imbalance illustrates the gap between the scale of harm and the scale of recognition. From the TPNW perspective, this actually raises serious concerns regarding equality, regarding accessibility and victim-centered justice. Now, we are now witnessing a potential transformative legal development with a draft law that have been submitted to the parliament in Algeria, and I would like to thank Rashid for sharing with me the draft law. The draft law objective is to criminalize French colonialism in Algeria. It was formally submitted and introduced and is expected to be debated in the Algerian parliament. The draft is highly significant for nuclear test victims. First, actually for the first time, nuclear testing is explicitly identified as colonial crime in its Article 5. Nuclear harm is framed as part of systematic structure of domination, and colonial crimes, including nuclear testing, are declared not subject to statute of limitation. This represents an important shift. Actually, we now talk from a historic narrative to a legal qualification. I just want to say some observations about the timing of the draft law that I personally find it both strategic and symbolic. First, it comes at a moment of renewed political momentum. This is actually the first time such a law has reached parliamentary debate after decades of proposals and discussions. And this is not happening in isolation. It is unfolding during a period of strained Algerian-French relations, influenced by disputes over recognition of colonialism, of colonial harms and legacy of nuclear testing. It was also submitted following a broader international conference that was hosted in Algiers beginning of this month and backed by the African Union. So let's come back to the draft law and see what it means to the victims. If adopted, the law would impose clear obligations on the Algerian state. It would require Algeria to, first, formally recognize nuclear test victims as a legal category. And secondly, to systematically document victims, sites, and impacts. And Algeria will also be obliged to establish a health monitoring and a victim assistance mechanism. And it will also be required to address environmental contamination as a matter of legal duty. So crucially, this would provide Algeria with a domestic legal basis implementing Article 6 of the IPPNW, particularly with regard to the victim assistance and environmental remediation on its territory. Now, what would this draft law mean for France? Although legally it will have no real impact on France, but this draft law has also, let's say, significant implications. In fact, by framing nuclear testing as a colonial crime, it first challenges the narrow compensation-only approach that has been adopted by France. It will place pressure on the adequacy of the Loi Morin and reinforce claims on environmental remediation, archival disclosure, and long-term monitoring. So under IPPNW logic, responsibility does not end with compensation. It includes assistance, remediation, and cooperation. When it comes to administrative barriers, also, even when legal frameworks exist, recognition often fails in practice. Victims face absence of comprehensive registries, no permanent health monitoring, fragmented industrial institutional responsibilities, and affected regions such as Regain and in Ashker remain statistically invisible. So politically, nuclear testing has long been framed as a security issue or a closed chapter of history. So this framing marginalizes victims and delays acknowledgement of ongoing harm. So victims are rarely included in policymaking, despite the fact that Article 6 of the IPPNW implicitly requires their participation. To move forward, three priorities are essential. First, adopt a presumption of harm in favor of victims, shifting the burden of proof away from those already affected. Secondly, establish joint data collection and long-term health monitoring mechanisms essential for both assistance and remediation. And third, ensure meaningful victim participation. As Aigerim already mentioned, Algerian victims are very, very underrepresented in international forums. And by recognizing affected communities as rights holders rather than beneficiaries, this will support their participation. So the Algerian draft law offers strong domestic anchor for these steps, and the TPNW provides the international framework. So this is a good news if the law will be adopted for the Algerian victims. To conclude, actually breaking the silence is not about reopening the past. We need to say it again and loud. It is not about fulfilling present legal obligation and restoring dignity to those who have lived too long without recognition. Under Article 6 of TPNW, recognition is not a political concession. It is a legal, moral, and a humanitarian duty. With the TPNW and the Algerian draft law, if adopted, we have an opportunity for change for the victims and great hope. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Amel, for making it clear that the recognition is not automatic, that is defined and shaped by the transformative shifts from the securitist language, but also that it's about humanitarian duty and legal duty to remediate the harm that was caused in the past. And I really hope that the law will be adopted next year, and that will be one of the first steps towards the transformative justice for the communities in Algeria. From here, we turn to how authorities also respond, also maybe fail to respond from French perspective and from this kind of realities as well. So our last but not the least speaker is Jean-Marie Collin, who has worked on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation for over 25 years now, and has collaborated with the United Nations on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and he is a director of ICAN France. Jean-Marie, it will be great if you also could explore and focus your intervention on political and administrative responses to the nuclear legacy in Algeria, including the actions taken, some challenges, and nuclear waste management and ongoing environmental contamination. Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope my video and my connection will be okay. If not, I will stop the videos. It's normal. You heard maybe some birds behind me. I'm somewhere in Costa Rica, in the capital. So that's the reason. I'm sorry, I didn't be able to really catch all the speakers. I heard the hand of Amel due again to a connection problem. So I hope I'm not going to repeat too much what's maybe it was said a little bit, and maybe I would be a little brief to give more times for the different Q&A. I will begin rather briefly with an overview of the current situations, and then I would go to some actions taken by France and Algeria over the past 25 years, and then giving some recommendations. So as you know, and I'm sure everybody said it, Algeria was affected between the 13th of February 1960 to the 16th of February 1966 by 17 nuclear explosions and 40 additional nuclear experiments involving the dispersion of plutoniums. And generally, people forget that there were these 40 additional nuclear experiments, but they are really important as they create a lot of pollutions, and we suspected that still some container with plutoniums, or at least particular plutoniums, are buried inside the Sahara. Beyond the contamination of population and the environment during this period, large quantity of radioactive waste are still present 65 years later. Indeed, from the very beginning of the nuclear military operations, France, as I demonstrated in a study published in July 2020 entitled Radioactivity Under the Sun Analysis with Regard to the TPNW, that I realized with the Observatory of Armament. So this study implemented a policy of burying all waste. The desert was then viewed as an ocean, from simple screwdriver to aircraft and tanks. Anything that could have been contaminated by radioactivity had to be buried by the French authorities. This study provides an inventory of radioactive waste present at the two former French nuclear test sites, so Regan and Inneker. And these contaminated materials must be added to two other categories: the non-radioactive waste, resulting from the operation and dismantling of the sites and from the presence of the Algerian army since 1966, and radioactive materials like vitrified sands, contaminated rocks, and lava produced by the nuclear explosion themselves.
Recording stopped.
That's the historical background about the action taken by France.
Recording in progress.
With regard to France, so as Amel explained about the Morin law, which even if this law didn't work correctly, it's a really important step that was realized in France, as they recognized for the first time in 2010 that the French nuclear explosion, so in the Sahara and in Polynesia, create some victims. So that's why it's named recognitions and compensations of victims of nuclear tests. There is 3 criteria to be recognized as a victim. Having been present in the geographical area of the Algerian or Polynesia test sites. It's important to note it that the geographical area of the Algerians are extremely precise and extremely small compared to the Polynesian test sites, which now it's recognized if you are in Polynesia, not specifically in the atoll of Moruroa or Fangantofa, for example. The second point to be recognized as a victim is that you have to be there during the period of the 17 explosions and that you are suffering from one of the radiation-induced diseases listed under the French law. This law, it's also important to understand, was adopted only as a result of pressure from French civil society. Well, Amel gave some numbers. I'm not going to go back on that. What is important to understand is that, as Amel explained, as this law didn't work very correctly, actually there is another project of law was deposited by an MP from Polynesia, Mariana Red Arbolo, who is supported the TPNW, which I'm working with her. And this new project of law will probably be debated next year and have the goal to change or give some ameliorations, informations on the Morin law. They will also, if it's adopted, create that in the public school, the radioactive fact will be the nuclear fact will be given as a program. So it will be a good thing that the scholar will study everything about what happened in the French Sahara and in French Polynesia. About Algeria, what is important to see is that on the Algeria side, political authorities have never promoted the Morin law, as the objective has been to obtain national reparations rather than individual compensations. It must be stated objectively that we don't have official figures or statistics, for example, from cancer registries. We have no figures. Since I worked, nobody was capable to send me some official figures. So it's pretty hard to say it or to give a numbers of people who were affected or can be affected by different diseases. What we know is that health authorities of Algeria recognize around 30 types of cancer-related disease. And also they include illness causing disabilities, as well as children born with congenital malformations. About the rehabilitation of affected areas, protective measures have been implemented, notably by the National People's Army, notably in 2020 or 2021, such as marking and securing the boundaries of the sites, and conducted periodic monitoring and analysis of water source. Nevertheless, the authorities acknowledge the need for a large-scale environmental rehabilitation plan and for support to population affected or living near these areas. It is also undoubtedly in this context that on 30 May 2021, under Decree number 21243, a national agency for the rehabilitation of former French nuclear test and explosion site in southern Algeria was established. This agency is a public and industrial and commercial entity under the supervision of the Minister of Energy. It's tasked with implementing rehabilitation program until the completion of the work and the handover of this former site to the concerned local authority. This agency clearly represents an important step taken by the Algerian state toward the process of ratification of the TPNW. But it should be noted that if this agency was officially created in 2021, apparently this agency is still not beginning his work 5 years later. In terms of national and international initiative, at both levels, Algeria has multiplied initiatives in recent months related to this legacy. Since 2021, the President Ahmed Tebboune, as well as the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Saïd Chanigla, have repeatedly called on France to release topographic maps identifying all burial sites of contaminated waste that have not yet been discovered. That means they already discovered some nuclear waste, which is important to know too. Until recently, the issue of nuclear explosion had been addressed solely through statements by the Algerian authority, president, and diplomatic channel. This is no longer the case, and I think Amel talked a little bit about that, about a law, an Algerian law that will be adopted. But this year, on the 13th of February 2025, making the 65th anniversary of Jabois Blood, so the first nuclear explosions, the National Assembly of Algeria took up this issue for the first time by organizing a conference entitled Nuclear Explosion in Algeria, a Crime Against Humanity and the Environment. This study they had under the auspice of the president of this National Assembly conclude with 13 recommendations. Among all of them, the number 2 is documenting the testimony of the Mujahideen and residents who lived through the nuclear testing period. The number 3 is the creation of a national nuclear memory center. And the number 4, monitoring environmental and health damage, are fully aligned with the work and concern of the informal working group on the Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW. Algeria was also co-sponsors, like a few weeks ago, of the resolutions addressing the legality of nuclear weapons, providing victim assistance and environmental remediations to member states affected by the use or testing of nuclear weapons. A resolution which was adopted by a large majority. We should note that France voted against. And this resolution decided that a formal meeting on victim assistance and environmental remediation will be held in early 2026 at the UN headquarters. So it's also positive that the Algerians decide and want to be engaged a little more on these topics. This year, again in September, at the last IAEA conference, for the first time, probably since 25 years, the Algerian diplomats organized a side event speaking during a 1 hour and a half about the nuclear test explosions and show a film of 15 minutes. I wasn't able to obtain this documentary that was apparently realized by the Ministry of Defense of Algeria. I would give like four recommendations. As probably you know, the International Atomic Energy Agency has been involved with Algeria regarding its past French nuclear test. They realized a report in 1998, and this report was published in 2005. The name of this report is Radiological Conditions at the Former French Nuclear Test Sites in Algeria, Preliminary Assessments and Recommendations. As you understand, the word preliminary means that was the first studies. Therefore, a second study could be carried out, and I encourage the Algerian government to make such a request to the IAEA, giving the evolutions of knowledge. The 13th September 2024, the Special Rapporteur on Toxic Substance and Human Rights for the United Nations, Mr. Marcos Aureliana, sent a letter to the French and Algerian governments concerning the long-term and intergenerational impact of French nuclear tests in Algeria, according to legal instruments and other established human rights standards, these letters requires a response, but to date, no communication has been made by both governments. So I recommend that both governments obviously answer to this letter. France must make public documents related to nuclear explosions, including the sites where waste has been buried. And there is a lot of other recommendations about this topic of the waste that I could say, but they are inside the study that I made. France should sign or at least be an observatory state for the next IPPNW review conference. And finally, it must be in phase that Algeria has a signatory state of the IPPNW, should as soon as possible now ratify it to be able to participate as a legal state at the next review conference. I will probably stop here and will be happy to answer some questions. And I hope you were able to hear me correctly.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marie, for highlighting different dimensions from the perspective of France, but also from Algeria. I think that it's quite clear that there are a lot of challenges, but also some of the changes, in addition to what Amel has said already in terms of the law, but also attempts to improve the situation. I have some questions. I think I'll start from you, actually, Jean-Marie, and then I'll go on another order. You mentioned that there is the agency on the rehabilitation under the Ministry of Energy. So my question is, if you could briefly just say that you said that it's not working effectively or it's not working at all, and it's one of the parts of the steps towards the ratification of the TPNW. Could you just expand a little bit? And also, has there been any attempts of providing actually the statistics? Because from what I heard today, that there is no statistics at all, or and that's really one of the things that strikes me, because I think that it's quite important to have at least something. And then I'll go to the questions to Amel also in terms of that. Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. You have around 2 minutes or 3 minutes to answer.
Yeah, about the statistics, that's really something that would be important to have. And that's really in the hands of the Algerian authorities. The French made a lot of mistakes. The French made a lot of very bad stuff in Algeria. But the statistic is in the hand of the Algerian authorities. Maybe they exist, but they are not available. Maybe they exist and they are in Arabic Algerian's language, which would be fully normal. But actually, nothing is available. And I was last February I was invited last February by the government of Algeria to commemorate the French nuclear explosions. And I spoke with different people of different ministry and even some high personalities, politicians. All of them told me that they have statistics and they would send me statistics, and they never send me nothing, because I guess there is no statistics. So that's really a point that would be important for Algeria to resolve, to like that we will know in some new information. About this agency, again, this agency is a really positive steps, and I guess I help with this study that I made in 2020 to push to the creation of this agency, because it was created in May 2021. My study was published in July 2020 and created a lot of press release and a lot of communication between even both governments. But again, this agency since 2021 is not working. It was just created on a paper, not officially. And this agency will really help again to understand, because we are confronted, as everybody knows, to a humanitarian problems, and we need to help people. So that's in the hand of the Algerian authorities. And if they begin to do it correctly, if they're really working at that, I would say, international community and the TPNW members will be able to help these countries a little more.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. My next question will be to Dr. Amel Mejri. I commented on your when you introduced the draft law that will hopefully be adopted. And just going from the perspective of Kazakhstan, we have the law since 1992, and we got our independence in 1991. So we have a lot of, we know now which is a good step, but we know about a lot of challenges in terms of that law. So I wanted to ask if you, because as I understand the text of the law that Rashid shared is in Arabic at the moment, but could you just share if there is any kind of reference to intergenerational impacts in the law in terms of nuclear testing? And the second question that I have, you could also briefly say, so when the law is adopted, everything is in the hand of Algeria and the responsibility as well. Do you think that there will be any movement then on the marine law from France in terms of compensation or the claims if Algerian community members will be filing against France? So how these two laws would then exist for community members so that they know this information if the law is adopted? Thank you. Your mic is off.
Okay, thanks for these questions. I'm going back to the draft law because I saw something in the preamble of the draft saying something about I
think that Amel's internet is a bit unstable. Okay, we'll wait a minute.
Yeah.
Sorry, your internet is a bit unstable. You cut off.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I went back to the draft law because I saw something in the preamble, not exactly about intergenerational harm, but something that says, and I quote, the translation is mine, nuclear radiation in the south of Algeria is still considering a source of danger that threatens human life and environment. I don't know if, I'm not sure that there is a clear mention of intergenerational harm in the draft law itself, but it is worth noting that the draft Algerian law doesn't explicitly use the term. But however, like intergenerational harm is clearly present in substance. The law actually recognizes the continuing health effects of colonial crimes and the lasting environmental contamination of affected regions, and the absence of any statute of limitation. So intergenerational harm, although it's not clearly introduced in the law, it still can be conducted from some other related topics, such as the prohibition of statute of limitation, the environmental contamination, the lasting environmental contamination, and so on. This is regarding the intergenerational harm. What was the second question, please?
The second question was that if the law is adopted and then the responsibility goes completely to Algerian government, then how the marine law will be used by the Algerian communities to claim for the harm that was conducted by France.
Okay, in Tunisia we have a proverb that says "اللي يعطيك حبل كتفو به," which translates into who gives you a rope, tie him with it. So the Algerian government will be legally obliged to respond to fulfill his obligations. What was missing in the previous legal national framework, the victims were left for their own sake without any legal obligation. They cannot ask for compensation from their own government and so on. Now it changed. The government, the state has to do something about the victims, about their relatives, and about the environment itself. So maybe they're going to be... the only thing that I'm afraid of is this law being instrumented and politically instrumented against France by the Algerian regime, and which will weaken the victims' position.
Thank you so much. I think that we can agree that the end goal in all of it is providing justice and reparations for those who's the survivors and victims of nuclear testing. So that has to be always a top priority. Thank you so much, Amel, for your question, for your answer. Maybe we have some questions that were written, but I think that Abdelhak has a question, and the hand was raised for some time now. Maybe if you could unmute yourself and answer and ask the question, but please briefly and introduce yourself. Thank you.
تحدث الأخ الأستاذ على ما أعتقد كولين على إجراءات النظام الجزائري، وتحدث عن الندوة في منذ 25 سنة. السؤال المطروح: نعلم في التسعينات أن النظام الجزائري اعتقل آلاف الناشطين سياسيين ووضعهم في أماكن قريبة على هذه المناطق التي أقيمت فيها تجارب نووية، مع أن النظام كان يعلم خطورة ذلك، والكثير منهم أطلق سراحهم بعد ذلك. فهل كانت هناك ردات فعل أو تداعيات من طرف منظمات حقوقية على هذا الفعل الذي يعني لم نسمع عنه كثير، أو لم نسمع تنديدات على هذا الشيء الذي يؤثر على المجتمع الجزائري يعني في هذا المجال؟
Aigerim, if you want, I can do the translation for Jean-Marie.
Yeah, that would be great.
Jean-Marie Abdelhak was asking about the fact that the Algerian regime, and you said something about a conference that was organized 25 years ago, and he said that the Algerian regime incarcerated some political opponents in the nuclear test sites without taking into consideration how harmful this can be for their health. He's asking, is there been any condemnation from human rights organizations of this act of the Algerian government?
Yeah, that's one of the points that we have a very few informations. Like at the end of the 90s, the Algerian state was very in trouble. There were a lot of protests. There were a lot of terrorist attacks. There was different problems in these countries, politically speaking. And we heard, and maybe sometimes read in some newspapers, that a lot of opponents or people were detained in the south of Sahara, notably in some former French state site in Niger. And apparently, because I will use that word, some of these places where these people were detained were contaminated. But we don't have a lot of information again about that point, and the only information that can come, that's the ones that the Algerian government today will release, or Algerian associations, which are a little hard for them to say some words about that problematic. So that's a point very important.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. So there were some questions in the chat. Som Nirola asked, what will be the environmental impact of the nuclear test to the other countries, as both our neighbor India and Pakistan, as well as Chinese, doing the regular tests of nuclear arms? I think that they meant maybe the nuclear capable missiles. At the moment, there are no tests. If there are any other questions, we have about 10 minutes to answer the questions from the audience. And then there will be closing remarks from Sean Connor from IPB. Okay, so Rashid, you have a question. Please unmute yourself.
تحية طيبة، أهلا وسهلا. ربما أنا مشاركتي ربما فيها بعض جزء فيها يكون على شكل سؤال، لكن الجزء الأكبر ربما كملاحظة أو ربما ملخص حول تعامل السلطات مع هذا الملف اللي الآن عمره أكثر من 65 سنة. طبعا الشهادات اللي قدمها جون ماري حول زيارته الأخيرة في فبراير 2025 والآن قرابة سنة، وزيارة كذلك باتريس للجزائر، وكثير من الشهادات، وكذلك ربما رصدنا حول ما كيفية تعامل السلطات الجزائرية مع الآليات الأممية أو في إطار التعامل مع المنظمات الدولية المهتمة إما بحقوق الإنسان أو باهتمامها بمناهضة التجارب النووية، تنبئ أو ربما نستخلص أن السلطات الجزائرية هي تتعامل مع هذا الملف كورقة سياسية أكثر منه لربما تنظيف مناطق التجارب النووية أو جبر الضرر أو ربما إيجاد حلول لربما للأضرار اللي باش الأضرار الناجمة، الأضرار البيئية الناجمة على هذه التجارب، بقدر ما هي فقط ورقة سياسية لتجاذب أو ربما استعمالها خلال توتر العلاقات ما بين الجزائر وفرنسا. وإحنا عرفنا خلال السنوات الأخيرة تقريبا أكثر من 20 سنة أن السلطات الجزائرية كلما كان هناك خصومة وكان هناك توتر في العلاقات الجزائرية الفرنسية تخرج هذا الملف من الدرج للحديث عن الجرائم الاستعمارية والحديث على التجارب النووية. في المقابل لا توجد هناك إرادة سياسية للتعامل مع هذا الملف، أو ربما تنظيف، لأنه في اعتقادي أنه معاهدة حظر التجارب النووية اللي وقعت عليها الجزائر فيها كثير من المواد اللي تنص على أنه الجزائر بإمكانها الاستعانة بجهات دولية أو باستعانة مع ربما كثير من المنظمات في إطار آليات هذه المعاهدة، حتى باش أقل شيء أنه توقف الآن الأضرار الناجمة عن هذه التجارب النووية. لكن مع الأسف الشديد السلطات الجزائرية بقيت تستعمل هذا فقط الملف لابتزاز سياسي في إطار تصفية حساباتها السياسية مع فرنسا، لا أكثر ولا أقل. وحتى بالخصوص فيما يخص هذا، الآن قرأنا وأنا شاركت مسودة قانون تجريم الاستعمار التي ستناقش يوم 21 من ديسمبر أمام البرلمان الجزائري في موادها، وخاصة في المادة 11 لا تنص على أن هناك أخذ بعين الاعتبار الأضرار البيئية، وكذلك الأخذ بعين الاعتبار الأضرار الناجمة على مدار ربما الأجيال. فقط هي مختصرة في تنظيف وتعويض واعتذار، لا أكثر ولا أقل، مما ينبئ أنه كذلك الرسائل اللي أرسلوها المقررين الأمميين في خريف سنة 2024 أرسلوها الجزائر الآن بعد سنة، لكن دون رد من طرف السلطات الجزائرية. لكن في المقابل نرى أن هناك تصريحات سياسية من مسؤولين سياسيين، وبدرجة أولى عبد المجيد تبون في كل مرة يتكلم على تنظيف هذه المناطق، لكن لا توجد هناك إرادة سياسية حقيقية من طرف السلطات الجزائرية. وهذا يعني أن هذا فقط هو ليس ملف هذا تستعمل السلطات الجزائرية ليس من انطلاقا من التزامها مع الشعب الجزائري أو التزام في إطار الالتزام مع الضحايا، وإنما هو تستعمل فيه فقط ورقة ضغط لمساومات سياسية دبلوماسية مع فرنسا، لا أكثر ولا أقل. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Rashid. I think that it's quite important that you gave also this overview, highlighting how lack of political will to actually support the survivors and to remediate and provide reparations can really harm and damage.
I globally agree with what Rashid said, and it's what I said in my speech. It's that at the moment, the Algerian authorities almost realize nothing. They just begin to, they put this agency, they prepare this project of law, but they just use it as a blackmail, as he said. They don't do actions in a good faith. And typically, this project of law, so I didn't read it, but what I understand about the tradition of Amel is, if you say inside the project of law, even if the French made obviously a lot of mistakes or very bad actions, if you begin to use some words as criminalizations, you can be sure that it's going to stop any relation with France. The goal is to do some diplomatic actions. And if you want to do some diplomatic actions, you can't use some words. You can ask for an apology, which will be understanding, like it's what the Polynesian asked, for example. But if you use some words that will just stop the relations, it's also a volunteer to stop the relations. And that's a real problem. So, and I think, as I understand, I think some point in this project of law are the 13 point that the President of the National Assembly released last February when I was in Algeria. So there is some points that are really interesting again, but there are some that should not be included if they really wants to act and to act for in a perspective of humanitarian consequences to help these people who are there. And again, that's a huge difference too with, for example, Kiribati or Fiji or your country, Kazakhstan. All of these countries want to work on the topics in the goal to help the people, help the populations. There is always some better actions to do it, but they act in that way. It's not what we can see with the Algerian authorities.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. Maybe Amel, you have something to add to what Rashid and Jean-Marie mentioned, and bless you.
Yes, I completely agree with Jean-Marie on the point that the draft law will undoubtedly affect the Franco-Algerian relations. In the short term, it may increase diplomatic tension because it reframes nuclear testing and other also actions not as historical episode but as a crime with continuing consequences. But beyond immediate political relations, the law may actually force a more honest dialogue on the ground, I mean, in responsibility rather than symbolism. For victims, its impact is far more concrete. I mean, by legally recognizing nuclear tests as colonial crimes and rejecting temporal limits on responsibility, the law moves victims from invisibility to legal recognition. And it does not resolve all the issue, but fundamentally strengthen victims. And I would like to take it from this perspective. Nationally, the victims will have a legal basis to ask for reparation, to ask for recognition from their own government, not from France.
Thank you so much, Amel. I actually agree with Jean-Marie in terms of the phrasing of the title, but at the same time, I agree with you. It's been over 60 years now, and it's really great, at least if there is a law on supporting citizens affected by the crimes committed. Crimes committed by colonial powers before. And it will be a lot of responsibility in the hands of Algeria. It's a lot of economic challenges for also Algerian government to provide proper compensation. That's something that we faced in terms of the law that exists since 1992. And I will be happy to continue the conversations with you in terms of our experience with the law. I think that we have one of the oldest laws to compensate victims of nuclear testing in Kazakhstan. Yeah, I will try again, Dr. Patrice, if your sound works. Let's try again. If it doesn't, I'm very sorry again. Can we try? Or you gave up?
Je participe encore après.
Sorry.
To make a kind of conclusion, I'm going again in the same concept. The relationship is terrible, and we can't move any step until the racist solution is over.
I'm so sorry, we still can't hear you.
Jean-Marie was right to describe the
I'm so sorry, Dr. Patrice. We still can't hear you. I'm very sorry about that. We have 3 minutes before the closing remarks. But I just want to say I'm very happy that I could have a moment to meet you in Nagasaki this year for the IPPNW Congress. That's when I met Dr. Patrice, and then Jean-Marie will also collaborated. So I really hope to collaborate with Amel more and also with SHOAA for Human Rights in the future. I think that, okay, so we have Rashid, go ahead with your last remark. Make it brief because we have closing. Thank you.
فقط في نقطة أنا نسيت حتى ذكرتها الآن إضافة إلى مداخلتي، أنه الجانب الخاص بعمل المجتمع المدني في تعاونه في إطار ربما حماية البيئة أو ربما رصد الأضرار اللي واقعة والناجمة عن التجارب النووية. نقطة كذلك أضيف إلى مداخلتي أنه دليل آخر على عدم جدية السلطات الجزائرية في الاهتمام بهذا الملف، ونعرف أنه إذا كان في هناك إرادة سياسية حقيقية من طرف أي دولة حول هكذا موضوع، من المفروض أن تجند كل الوسائل من أجل تسليط الضوء على هذه الكارثة، إما برصد أو بالاهتمام الصحي بضحايا هذه التجارب النووية أو الاشتغال إلى غير، أو تنظيف أو أقل شيء التوعية. لكن شفنا السلطات الجزائرية من جهة أنها ترافع في مسألة أنها تطالب بالتعويض وبالاعتذار من طرف الحكومة الفرنسية، لكن في المقابل تستخدم عندها ازدواجية التعامل مع هذا الملف، تحارب كل الأصوات أو كل منظمات المجتمع المدني أو كل الناشطين البيئيين أو المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان اللي ربما أنهم يحاولوا أنهم يسلطوا الضوء على هذه الكارثة، لكن مع الأسف الشديد أنه يمارس عليهم التضييق من طرف السلطات الجزائرية، أو بالأحرى حتى من وزارة المجاهدين التي تحمل الصفة المعنوية للتركة الاستعمارية، وكذلك التضييق الأمني اللي يتعرض له النشطاء المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان أو حتى نشطاء البيئيين الذين ربما يريدون التحرك في هذا الملف بشكل مستقل. وهذا دليل آخر على أن هناك في تضييق وأنه لا توجد إرادة سياسية من طرف السلطات الجزائرية في التعامل مع ملف التجارب النووية الفرنسية في الصحراء الجزائرية. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Rashid, for also mentioning that. I think that the participation of civil society effectively in a lot of issues internally in the country is quite important. And a lot of communities, affected communities also in different other countries face a lot of pressures from their governments and regimes. And before I will pass the floor to Sean to with the closing remarks. I just wanted to again thank our panelists, our speakers, Dr. Amel and Mejri. Thank you so much, Jean-Marie Collin and Dr. Patrice Richard. Thank you so much for being our brilliant speakers, for highlighting so many different challenges, but some of the positive changes and maybe hopes for the better representation, for remediation reparations. And I truly hope that the pursuit of justice for the communities in Algeria and Sahara the justice will be served. If not now, then in the future, and there will be a transformative shift towards that. Thank you so much. And now I'll pass the floor to Sean from IPB to close our webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you all to the speakers and to Aigerim for the moderation as well. I think it's been a truly enlightening event that also provides us with some hope despite the difficulties, of course, that we see in front of us as well. I have a lot to cover and not too much time to cover it, so I'll try to be quite brief here. The first thing, maybe just to follow up on Rachid's last comments there, is the importance of involving civil society voices and particularly victims' voices throughout the entire process, to put those at the forefront and make sure that these voices are being listened to and that we, who ourselves are not victims, are supporting and standing in solidarity. Alongside of this includes, of course, the importance of education. As was discussed throughout the webinar today, still knowledge and understanding of the nuclear tests and the victims in Algeria is not as well known as it needs to be, and I think education and international solidarity efforts are vital here. Following that, of course, is the vital importance of recognition. I took the quote from today's webinar, and I might paraphrase it a bit here, but recognition is not a political concession, but it is a moral, legal, and humanitarian duty. And this is vital as we move forward. The next thing to highlight is, of course, international and regional solidarity that all of us here, but also wider networks, are informing on what's going on, standing in support and solidarity with those victims on the front lines. Then also support for the initiatives. We see that there are many possible next steps that are underway with the law in Algeria, with some actions in France, with this committee or this group that has not yet formed or taken the next steps beyond forming, rather. We have the connection of nuclear testing victims across borders, I think, as well. I think today's conversation was really nice to hear also, Aigerim, you to share some of your insights from the work that you've been doing in Kazakhstan, and some of the connections, but also some of the vital questions when we look at the intergenerational components and whether this is included in laws, whether we look at how laws of those countries where the nuclear testing took place interacts with the laws of the countries that had committed the nuclear tests. So I think also there's a lot that we can do to push that forward. The next point I have is, of course, the vital importance of the TPNW, which places at the forefront victims and environmental remediation. We have the need in Algeria for the complete ratification of the TPNW, and for nuclear perpetrator states, whether it be France or the other nuclear perpetrators, to, at very minimum, come to the TPNW meetings as observers. But of course, our strong demand in the long term is for all of these countries to join onto the TPNW, to sign and ratify, and for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons, to ensure that nuclear testing and victims of nuclear testing, or God forbid, an actual nuclear attack, never occurs again. And of course, throughout all this, again, the focus on victims and the environment at the forefront, people and planet-centered approaches to how we take our action together. One more quote I had was that justice is not just an abstract concept. We have concrete proposals for how we reach justice, healthcare, reparations, environmental remediation, and truth and dignity. Based in this, I think we have a lot of work to do in front of us, but together we're stronger in these efforts, and thank you so much.